Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Part 4. Serious People of Reddit. What is your downright scariest real-life story? Scariest moment was birth of my first child, via my wife. There was like 18 hours of labor, and then she asked for the numbing thing because the pain was too much. We were trying to get some sleep at like 1 a.m., and all of a sudden a dozen docs and nurses rushed in saying the baby's heart rate was dropping, and we had to go to C-section immediately. They wheeled her out and I wasn't allowed into the unit like 20 minutes later when they started the C-section. I was scared spitless. I couldn't even from words. Anyways, daughter turns 5 on Sunday and is the cutest little thing I've ever seen. A couple of weeks ago, I was riding a friend's motorcycle through a curvy path in a nearby Valley Parkway. I ride through it pretty frequently, so I was a bit complacent. Going about 40 miles per hour through a curve, I see this big-ass pothole. Hitting it would have for sure caused me to flip, so I go a bit wide. What I didn't see was the patch of mud on the road right next to the pothole. As soon as the back tire hit that patch of mud, I felt the back end of the bike lose traction. I felt my boot rubbing up against the ground. I felt my heart sink, and it seemed like everything was in slow motion. Luckily, the bike regained traction and didn't high side, but that was a moment I thought for sure I was about to wreck. Had to buy a new pair of boots, but I'd rather that over what could have happened. Was working as a summer camp counselor one summer in my teens. I'm in the pool with my campers when one of them asks why there are police on the pool deck. I turn around and find the camp director yelling for everyone to get out of the pool. I made sure all of the kiddos got out of the pool before I got out. Seconds later, a man comes running onto the pool deck before being stopped and arrested by the police officers. We still had to get all the campers to a safe place, and as we walked to the shelter house, a police helicopter hovered overhead and multiple police officers were yelling instructions at us. We ended up in lockdown for 2 hours, completely kept in the dark about what was going on. Terrifying not to be responsible for myself, but also responsible for the lives of my 15 campers. This was almost 5 years ago. I moved into a new house in January. In July, I started to get sick. Early August, I couldn't stop coughing and could barely function. The doctor said he thought it was pneumonia and gave me heavy-duty antibiotics. He told me if I got worse to go to the emergency department as there was a really bad strain going around. I spent 2 days sleeping in my recliner chair on the ground floor as I couldn't stop coughing. By the end of the second day, I was feeling very ill, so I called an ambulance. When they arrived, one of them commented that it smelled really gassy. I said I'd had the heater going for 2 days straight. They took me to hospital. I sat there while they did tests, chest x-ray, etc. They couldn't see anything much, so they discharged me. I remember walking out feeling like I was peeing myself. I walked the 15-minute home at 1 a.m. When I got home, I went upstairs and got in the shower. I had to sit down as I was wobbly, and I couldn't control my bladder, but ended up going to bed upstairs. Next day was a sunny day, so I opened the house up and was cleaning in the kitchen. I caught a whiff of something. I called a plumber, and they ended up finding a gas leak. When the connection into the house was installed, they used a water connection, not a gas connection, so over the years it was slowly working its way loose and was now almost fully open. It had also been illegally installed in an inaccessible area of the kitchen, so it was seeping out, and the only reason the house didn't blow up. I know that if I had not gone to the hospital that night and slept upstairs after I got home, I'd be dead. I ended up having chemical pneumonia, and I have terrible scarring on my lungs. I'm grateful to the doctor for scaring the shit out of me about how bad the pneumonia strain was, because I know now I was only hours from dying. My just under 2-year-old son fell down in the kitchen. He had just started talking, and 5 minutes before he fell, he said, "I hurt," and fell over. We thought he was being silly, but he said it 2 to 4 more times. Finally, my wife took him to the kitchen to have a popsicle. It was like 8 a.m., but whatever. She stood him up and he literally fell over. Then he tried to talk, but it was baby talk gibberish. We rushed him to the pediatrician. As we were waiting, I noticed that one side of his face was drooping. I said, "Looks like a stroke." The pediatrician, who showed up at some point, said, "No way. Highly unlikely for a 1-year-old." They ran tests for what felt like days, but were probably more like 10 minutes. I kept saying his left arm is dropping now, and his face is fully stroked out. Finally, my wife stood up with him in her arms and yells, "Fuck this, I'm driving him to Children's Hospital." The pediatrician kept telling us to go to a different hospital because he had admitting permission or whatever. They also tried to get us to take an ambulance, but said it would take 15 minutes. We ran out, buckled him into his seat, and drove like a race car driver to Children's. They took him in, and there was immediately like 40 doctors in the room. They ran all kinds of tests in seconds. Guess what? Stroke. He was having a hemorrhagic stroke from a burst capillary in his brainstem. He was dying, like for real. If we had stayed at the pediatrician's, he would have died. It was terrifying. Those ER doctors at Children's Hospital saved his life. They were brilliant. I barely remember the day. But at some point the doctors at Children's asked questions like, "Was he struck? Do you hit him?" etc. We realized later that they were attempting to discern if we caused it by hitting him in the head. The burst capillary was actually so deep a hit on the head wouldn't have caused it, per his neurologist. We spent nearly 3 months in patent, including a harrowing week in the NICU. He worked really hard at walking, mostly thanks to the musicians who go to the hospital and play for the kids. Every time they were there, he wanted to dance. And he did a ton of work every week just to be able to dance when they played live music. Fast forward. He is 8 and healthy as an ox. He has drop foot and a very weak left hand, but he is so good. Many of the outcomes that were possible were much worse than his slightly weak left hand and slight drop foot. The neurologist told us one time that they are fairly confident that he was going to be left-handed because of where the stroke happened. Apparently, if he had been right-handed, his speech could have been affected much worse. Anyway, that shit was terrifying. We had a 2-month-old baby with us as well. We spent years traveling to and from Children's Hospital for therapy and appointments. We just had his last appointment with the neurologist last week. They said, "We don't need to see you guys again," which is a good thing. It's not coming back and his scans all look amazing. I got really sick with a C. diff and E. coli bowel infection. I felt like I was dying the first day. We had to drive 8 hours to get home. I threw up at a rest stop, which never happens due to my vomit phobia. The ER missed the C. diff part of my problem the first time I was hospitalized. A week later, the pain started. We went to the hospital and I was just in pain. My intestines' insides were literally being melted off by the bacteria. 12 tenths horrible, agonizing, wanna-die pain. I couldn't do anything but curl up and sob and beg, and for the first time in my life, I knew what it was like to not have ADHD. I couldn't hear anything or see everything anymore. All I could sense was the agonizing, burning, throbbing pain. They couldn't give me any more pain meds without killing me. I honestly wasn't close to dying. I was okay. And I am okay. No lasting damage other than the memories. There is no way I can describe pain that great. You just have to experience it to know, and I wouldn't wish it in my worst enemies. I went hunting with my dad. We managed to get a deer right at sunset, and neither of us brought flashlights. So, he said he would gut it while I went and got the truck so we didn't have to drag the deer out. I was walking on our property trail into the woods back to our house when I heard a noise behind me. I sounded like footsteps. It was very dark and I couldn't hear anything. I didn't turn around. Laughing nervous, I said, "Very funny, Dad." There was no response. I heard a twig break and I ran like hell. I didn't stop until I got home. I was scared as hell, so I got my mom to come with me to help my dad get the deer home. I asked him if he was behind me when I was walking in the woods, and he just gave me a weird look. He said no, and that he was still cleaning out the deer. I have no idea what was behind me to this day, and part of me is happy I didn't turn around. This is one of the reasons I never go into the woods at night. This is one of my own making, so by no means feel sorry for me. Last year on Memorial Day, I and a few friends went out drinking. In honor of my brothers and sisters, I'm ex-military, I spent a lot of money on drinks that the bartender mixed entirely too strong. I don't remember this, but I left the bat because I had just started dating this girl whom I was supposed to meet at my house around 3 a.m. Somehow I ended up in the next town over in someone's yard behind a big privacy fence. We live in Louisiana, so the fence posts were topped with a fleur-de-lis. This is very important soon, I promise. The girl I was hooking up with tracks me through Snapchat because I never made it home, and my friends find me and help me over the fence. All I remember is coming back to consciousness and telling my friend, I'm stuck. He assumed I meant my shorts. I meant the part of the fence that was stuck in my arm from my elbow to my wrist with said fleur-de-lis at the end of said fence post. He had no choice but to wrench me off the fence post and have his girlfriend and mine to tourniquet my arm and rush me to the ER. In that 30-minute ride to the ER, all I could imagine were my boys, 7 and 8 years old, being so upset if I didn't make it through the night. It absolutely fucking terrified me. I don't care about anyone, not even myself, but those boys are my everything. It terrified me that I could do that to myself and them. 3 bags of blood, passing out 3 times in the hospital from lack of oxygen, and my now ex-girlfriend taking care of me for a few days. My heart will always go out to that woman for staying with me after that bullshit. I'm still here with just a gnarly scar on my arm. Currently working on trying to quit drinking. It's been a hard battle, and I haven't quit, but I've certainly cut back. Hoping to quit completely by the end of the year. My story isn't as terrifying as some people's, but I thought I would put it here anyway. I took my dog out for a walk before bed because it was going to rain, and I didn't want her tracking in mud through the dog door. Keep in mind I was 11 at the time. We had a pretty large piece of property that went into the woods. My dog always liked longer walks, and it took her some time to do her business. We had 2 dogs at the time, Abby and Gracie. Abby was Gracie's biological mom. Gracie had just turned a year old a few weeks previously to this event. The walk started out relatively normal as we went further back into my savanna-scaped backyard with lots of cedar and Spanish oak trees. Eventually, Abby was no longer walking beside us, which I thought was weird, but wasn't too uncommon. Then Gracie wouldn't stop cowering under my legs, which really started to freak me out. Eventually, I heard a bunch of footsteps around me with a strange, dog-like cackle. In this moment, I thought, shit, coyotes. I was too far back into my backyard, about 10 acres in, for me to run back to the house. Abby was nowhere to be found, and she was our 90-pound guard dog. Gracie had always been a coward, so she would be no help. When I tell you this weren't just 1 or 2 coyotes, it was a horde of coyotes ganging up on me and my little dog Gracie. All I could do was picking up a few of the rocks and hold them tightly as all these coyotes circled around me. I don't exactly know what was going on, but there was also a freaking mountain lion. I was not only terrified, but confused as to why a mountain lion was with a bunch of coyotes, and why they were hanging up on me in the first place. I immediately thereafter realized the coyotes were not interested in me, but interested in my dog Gracie. She had started her heat a few days before. Prey for the mountain lions in my area had been scarce recently, so it was likely after the coyotes as a last resort. This entire extravaganza was just a Mother Nature flipping me off. The next few seconds were hell for me. I was tense and scared as a young 11-year-old. Eventually, I just picked up the heaviest rocks I could find and started throwing them wherever I could see a faint figure of a coyote in the darkness. Wasn't entirely sure what happened to the mountain lion. My flashlight was too dim. Finally, my dog Abby showed up. When I tell you she turned into a freaking demon, I'm not laying. There must have been 20 coyotes at the very least. I'm not exaggerating. They wanted my dog Gracie likely to mate with her. These guys weren't going away without a fight. All I could do is screaming and throw rocks like a little girl while my 90 pounds dog Abby took on 20 freaking coyotes. Eventually, when I saw an opening, I ran like hell back to my house. At first, the coyotes were chasing after me because Gracie was also with me, but I let go of her leash because I was too terrified and also extremely cowardly as a kid. Abby didn't need/have a leash. Abby had followed me back while trying to defend me from coyotes, and Gracie hadn't actually left my side. Abby had just scared most of them away. She was a badass dog. Abby had literally dragged back a freaking leg of a coyote. What is that? My father ran over to me when he heard my screams when I got close enough to the house with his shotgun. A few coyotes were still trying to follow, but they cowered away once they heard the gunshot my dad had fired. Seeing coyotes in my part of the countryside weren't abnormal, but a whole horde of them was extremely uncommon, much less with a freaking mountain lion. Thankfully, all I really had was a bruised but from falling over and scraped legs, otherwise unharmed. Gracie's back had been scratched up a bit and Abby was an absolute mess, mostly from fucking up the coyotes. I mean, blood everywhere. She had to spend a few days at the vet to recover from her injuries. I don't leave for my backyard at night without my shotgun anymore. Whether or not you believe the story is completely up to you, but to me it's completely real. This just tells me how strong a male's sex drive can be. Geez. I was traveling on my motorcycle through South Carolina on the interstate. I was about 75 feet back from 3 cars too, in left lane, passing one on the right with me behind them passing. As the second car went past, they had a mechanical malfunction and were jerking right to left, striking the car they were passing, and then inner guardrail posts going right, pulling left, and flipping sideways over into opposite lanes of traffic, scattering debris on the road and in the air. As I went through the crash area, a piece of their car body flew about 6 feet in front of me, with another piece just missing my head and shredding the shoulder back of my leather jacket as it passed. I pulled over within about 75 yards and got off my bike. It was then I noticed my jacket. When I took it off, it was ripped about 5 inches from corner of tight shoulder all the way across the shoulder area. I never even felt it. I had thought I had just been missed it. I still remember seeing that lady's face upside down as she flipped. Been a swimmer my whole life. Varsity, MVP. I wasn't afraid of the water. One day I'm at the beach and my friend is lifeguarding. We bullshit for a few minutes when he asks if I want to take a quick swim out to the buoy about 200 yards away. For a former competitive swimmer, this distance is like a fraction of my warm-ups, so no problem at all. I say sure, and off we went. However, there were some variables that I wasn't quite used to. The ocean was cold. Water that cold literally takes your breath away. This, on top of not having goggles, so the whole swim my head is up and out of the water, which makes getting into the natural rhythm of strokes a little more difficult and more tiring. This, on top of what I now know is athletic-induced asthma. So I'm losing my breath and energy fast. I make it to the buoy and meet him and another lifeguard. We're just treading water and talking when my friend heads back. I start my return when the exhaustion and the inability to really catch my breath hit me. So here I am, about 200 yards out, with no pool bottom beneath me that I can rest on, and the panic is setting in. I start floating on my back, side stroking. Nothing is really helping. The panic is starting to overtake me, and I have to literally tell myself if I panic, I'm fucked. I see the shore and the lifeguards and consider waving them in, but my dumb ass would be too embarrassed for causing a scene on a nice day at the beach. So I'm struggling, looking out to the shore, convincing myself that I'm not making progress and that the water is pulling me out. The water was completely calm. Again, I distinctly tell myself that if I panic, I'm going to die. Somehow I make it in, meet my friend who came back out to greet me. He's confused as to why I'm totally exhausted and grabbing onto him. Later on, I read about signs of drowning, and the floating on my back and the changing of strokes is actually an indicator of a swimmer in distress. Also, another weird fact is that my mother had such a strong impression that day that I was in danger. This was about 15 years ago, and I still won't go in the ocean. Walking to Blockbuster on fall night when I was around 12 to 13 when some guy in a white or gray Nissan started following me. Eventually he started asking me weird shit like if I had the time, do I have a cell phone, and am I meeting anyone? About that point I ducked into a bar, and after informing someone at the front, after they finally shut up about no one under 21 being allowed in, I called my house and got picked up by my dad. During 5-10-ish minutes it took for my dad to get there, the guy kind of circled around the bar a handful of times before finally leaving. Last year I and my roommate went out on the porch to smoke. Everything went well with that. When we went to come back inside, that's when shit got scary. I went to open the door, but it was locked and my heart dropped. Luckily my roommate had the key to the side door with him, so we went inside. Looked at the door and the deadbolt was locked. The fucking deadbolt. We were the only 2 people who lived there at that time, or as we knew of. Before this happened, I would be experiencing weird things around the house. It would sound like there's someone walking around the upstairs. I thought that I was just tripping, but my cat would look up at the ceiling and back at me with fear on her face and wouldn't leave my side. Food would come up missing too. One time a whole pack of steaks came up missing from the freezer. My roommate doesn't cook, so I know he isn't eating them. All this points to there was a squatter living in our house. I was a bus driver. I was taking my break reading a newspaper parked at an angle in the bus loop. My doors were open to allow passengers to board. Dude with 2 young energetic kids gets on. He looks like he's not coping well. After 5 minutes I fold up my newspaper, start the engine, close the doors, take off the parking brake, and put it in gear. I look in my mirror to make sure the spay kids are sitting down. One kid is missing. I ask the dude where his kid is. He starts frantically looking around the bus. I put the brake back on and open my window to check outside the bus. I look down towards my outward turned tire and I see the kid. He's sitting in front of my tire with his legs spread open, picking at the treads. I've never been able to get that memory out of my head. Was walking a girl I was dating at the time out to her car. She was parked on the side of the street, and next to her car was this big bush we had in our front yard. As we're walking to her door, I noticed the bush move a little bit. I stop her, and we walk to the side to peek around. Some guy is standing there holding a baseball bat. I pull out my gun. I have a concealed carry license, and confront him. He takes off running into the woods next to my house. Really glad I walked her out and happened to have my gun on me. It's scary to think what might have happened if I didn't. She had a stalker at the time, we think it was, but never caught the guy or knew for sure. Starting about when I was 12 up into my early 20s, I saw and heard what I can only describe as shadows. It wasn't an all-day, everyday thing, but typically a few times a week I'd see figures made of shadow standing around or walking, talking, etc. More at night than during the day, but it would happen in broad daylight and always accompanied that feeling of hairs being raised on my arms and neck. One night I'm asleep in my bed, probably 13 or younger. I took to having a light on in my room when I slept to help me feel safe while I was sleeping. I woke up suddenly with major creepy vibes and noticed the light was wrong, redder than it should be. I look around my room, feeling like something is watching me. Mind you, my bed is against the wall in a corner on the opposite side of the room from the door. I look over at the wall that my bed is against, and there's a shadow figure. Flat like black paper but sharp and clear in the low light as a shadow under full sun. I'm looking at this thing holding my breath when it begins to peel off the wall and bend over my bed while emitting the most horrifying screech I've ever heard to this day. I tore out of my bed to the door, tried turning the handle, but it wouldn't move. I turned back to see if it was chasing me, but it was gone. Then I turned back to the door and tried to open it again. Thing opened immediately like it wasn't just stuck. I ran down to my parents' room bawling and curled up on their floor and eventually passed out. I told my parents, who took this event very seriously, had prayer circles and our church pastor come tend to the room in our house. I was terrified of the darkness and could barely sleep for a long time. I'm still a light sleeper and will wake up from little noises in every place I've lived. This was the only time I ever had one of the shadows do anything to directly address my presence. I could hear them walking around or talking to each other or themselves, not just in my house growing up. But that was the only time they ever paid me any mind, and it absolutely scared the living shit out of me. When I was 15, I swear by Satan's hooves and heroine's antlers, a man and a woman were working together and had marked me for kidnapping. Woman followed me around the store and outside. The woman stood nearby while this big hulking man walked up to me with a look that just set me off, like he was up to no good, and kept asking me if I needed help, even though I'd already said no. I just ran across the main road. I told my mother when I got home, but she didn't believe me. The town this happened in had 2 to 3 warnings a year, given to school kids to be careful cause someone had tried to grab or coax someone into their car. As much as parents love to talk to kids about this stuff, they never believe it when they see it or hear about it. Like when my little sister was about a year old, we were at the mall. I was maybe 11. We were there with a group, but at the time me and my sister and my mom had split off for some reason, and some middle-aged man was very obviously following us. My sister was an early walker, so she may have been walking, or may have been in a stroller. I just remember she wasn't actively being held. Anywhere we went I'd turn around and he was maybe 6 feet away. This dude was always facing us. He'd lean against a wall and pretend he wasn't looking at us and into the middle distance, but he was cutting his eyes so fast it looked like something was wrong with them. Back and forth rapidly, while he's leaning against a completely random wall pretending to be casual, and I was so scared and begging my mom to please let's leave. She was being weird and not really responding to me, so eventually I fully panicked and picked up my sister, and then he walked away. The older I get, the scarier this is. I now think, as does my therapist, that my mom has borderline personality disorder. I really think that she thought the guy was following us because he thought she was hot or something and she liked the attention, and that's why she wouldn't respond to me begging her to get us out of there. At the time it was scary and I was frustrated with my mom for not seeing that we were clearly in danger, but I felt like I was on top of the situation and wouldn't have let anything happen. Now, I'm just like, what the fuck? I was a literal actual child and my mom was refusing to protect my baby sister from a literal actual kidnapper. Did she think the creepy man found her attractive? She hated having kids and loved getting attention. Was she hoping the creepy man would get rid of one for her, and she'd get to be dramatic on the news, and everyone would feel sorry for her? I could see it. Remembering makes me want to throw up. Last December, I went to get my COVID booster. I didn't know it at the time, but I was stretched really thin and more stressed about the holidays than I knew, amongst other things. My therapist had been telling me for a while I should consider meds for my anxiety. I guess when you live with it for so long, your normal doesn't register as actually off. So I had had a lot of trouble finding a Pfizer booster. Even though I knew that in reality there aren't known allergens in the vaccines, I wanted to stick with Pfizer because I have some drug allergies and I had done fine on 2 already. I finally found a clinic set up in a closed Lord & Taylor site in a local mall and booked my shot. It was 3 days before Christmas, and being the total hermit I am, it never crossed my mind that I was walking into madness. I had to walk through the mall to get to the store, which was packed. Cue anxiety, but I push it down. I make it to the clinic, get my shot, and sit down to wait for my 15 minutes before I can go. About 5 minutes into the wait I get lightheaded and a little nauseous. I get up to go over to the guy that monitors the waiting area and let him know I am lightheaded. Luckily, there is a medic there. Before he even gets over to me, I also of sudden can't breathe. My heart is racing and adrenaline is pumping through me in waves. I am sure I am having a heart attack. I am 43 and am terrified. They hook me up to a portable heart machine thing and I am freaking out. The thoughts running through my head were, I cannot die in a closed L&T staring at the men's changing room, and I am going to end up some anti-vaxxer meme. Turns out it was just a panic attack. But I have never had one before. My husband had to Uber over to drive me home, and the next day I went to urgent care. I did not sleep at all, had many panic attacks all night, and they assured me my heart was fine, and it is actually quite common with vaccines, WDF. They give me Xanax and send me home. The next 2 weeks were brutal until I could get in to see my doc. I now take daily anti-anxiety meds and have Xanax for acute attacks, which thankfully haven't happened at all since starting the meds. The Night of Chains. In 2004, I lived in northern Michigan and was roughly 11 years old. I lived in small community with my parents and older brother where in the summer, everyone left their front and back doors open, screen doors closed. At night, due to the summer heat, practically no one had AC. It's a strange feeling at night when all of the house's windows and doors are only covered with a thin screen. It's like things in the dark could see inside the house, but you couldn't see them. Always gave me the heebie-jeebies. It was late, maybe midnight. The bugs at night were usually very noisy and the heat could be oppressive, but after a while, eventually sleep would come. I was just hopping into bed after playing video games, and I had this uneasy feeling coming from my window which faced the front of the house. The first thing that happened was the bugs stopped chirping right outside my window, like when walking too close to a cricket in a field and they stop making noise so you can't find them. I remember thinking that it was odd, but it could just be a neighborhood cat walking by or something like that. That was all too wrong, I would soon realize. Shortly after the bugs became silent, maybe 5 feet from my window in the pitch black, the sound of chains dragging in the dirt faintly caught my ears. The sound of a dragging chain is a very particular sound, so I immediately put my finger on it and thought it was so very out of place. They sounded as if they were drug in the dirt by a human because I'd hear the sound for a second, then it'd fade, and then pick back up again as if being dragged, and the steps slowed down the drag, so it wasn't continuous. Overall, they became louder as the chains dragged past my window and kept going past until the noise faded away, maybe within 10 seconds. Nevertheless, this was probably the most terrifying 10 seconds of my life. I was petrified, in my bed, side-glancing toward my window screen. I felt like, whatever it was, it could clearly see me as it passed by my window, because it was darker outside than inside my room. Plus, there was only a screen over the window. Eventually, I fell asleep, and the next day, I didn't tell anyone in the house about it. I wanted to explain it on my own, quickly, as to brush off the experience as just my imagination, or something easily explained. So I made a conscious effort to investigate and dismiss this strange event. Walking outside the front door the next morning, my investigation did the opposite of what I intended. Starting 5-ish feet outside the front door in the dirt and grass that was our front yard was the clear indentation of two things, being dragged through the dirt. The lines were roughly a foot to a foot and a half apart and continued from the front door, around my window, around my brother's window, and on the side of the house by our backyard fence. My inquisitive feeling started to become more of a feeling of dread as I opened our fence door to continue to follow the tracks. Going into my backyard, where I'd play all the time with our dog, my brother and neighborhood friend, the lines in the dirt were now committing the ultimate trespass. The fear of the night before started upon me again. It was as if I was being watched, and it really started to scare me. Our backyard was sandier than the front, so the lines were even more noticeable and clearly went through the entire backyard and came around the other side of the house where the other fence door was. That's when I lost the lines in the grass of the side yard. My investigation only led to more questions. The lines, whatever they were, could be clearly seen around at least 65% of the house as a faint indentation in the dirt and grass. I don't know what was dragging the chains, or why it dragged the chains around our house, making enough effort open and close our fence doors. The only thing I knew at the time, and to this day, on a hot summer night, July 2004 in northern Michigan, around midnight, there were chains dragged around my house. This happened back in 2013. I have always had dreams that I was back in school, and this night was no different. This time I was in the chemistry lab, and the Bunsen burners were on. When I woke up, I could still smell that unpleasant burning scent. I jumped up out of bed thinking my uncle may have been burning something he was cooking. We met up in the kitchen with the same question. He mentioned hearing crackling from his room and asked if it was hailing. We both walked outside to see the house in flames. He grabbed the hose. I ran back up to my room to grab my phone to call 911. I knew we had a fire extinguisher downstairs and opened the door. My cat Bailey ran out and upstairs to my bedroom. At this point, the police are on their way, and there are no firefighters for a while. Everyone in our area is volunteer, and we're all on other calls. It was at least 30 minutes before they showed up. My other uncle showed up as well. He used to be on the fire department. I kept asking him if they had found Bailey yet. From the outside of the house, it didn't look too bad. We knocked the fire, or so we thought. It had traveled up into the roof and was still burning. My room is partially in the roof. My closets are right next to the crawlway, attic. About an hour into the whole fiasco, my uncle came up to me and told me Bailey didn't make it. I punched him in the chest thinking he had to be joking. He had a twisted sense of humor. He assured me he wasn't joking, and I swear I cried so loud the whole neighborhood had to hear me. We were allowed back inside a few hours later to grab any personal belongings that weren't ruined by fire, smoke, and water. The upstairs bedrooms and bathroom got hit the worst. My heart still aches wondering if Bailey was waiting for me to come save him. I was home alone one day when I was 15. I was chilling downstairs when I needed to go to the bathroom, so I grabbed my phone and walked to the stairs to go upstairs. Right as I passed the door and about to go upstairs, someone knocks on the door. I don't answer the door when I'm home alone, so I just sat in the corner between the door and the stairs until the guy left. The knocks were fairly loud, and he knocked 4 times. After a little bit of no knocking, I figured he was gone. All of a sudden, I hear out back door open. I bolt upstairs and lock myself in my room. I texted my mom, "Someone is here." I texted and called my grandma, lives literally a minute away, that there was someone in the house and for her to come over ASAP. Then I called 911. I could hear the guy come upstairs and walked around to all of the rooms. I'm sitting as far away from the door and as hidden as I can be when he jiggles the doorknob and tries to come into my room. I about lost it there. My grandma actually beat the cops to my house. Cops found the guy and arrested him. I was just glad that he didn't try and break into my neighbor's house where the 11-year-old girl was home alone. I live in a relatively peaceful country, but back when COVID was at its peak, our economy got really bad, so there was a lot of increased crime. One day my friend and I were walking, Sunday at around April 5th in the evening, and it was a stroll we had done before. There weren't that many cars on the road, but that was pretty normal for the day/time it was. So as we're walking, two guys walk up to us and one of them pulls out a gun. Ask us to hand over everything in our pockets. Now for some odd reason, I had carried both the old phone I had and my new phone. I can't say why, but I left the house with both because I had a feeling I would need them. I gave him my old phone and my friend hands hers over. He looks at my new phone and asks for it. I refused because, to be honest, I just got the phone and I was more afraid of my dad, who had bought it, than the robber. Yes, I'm in therapy for that, lol. He points the gun right at my head and says, "I'm going to kill you if you don't." I still refused. Honestly, it was the dumbest/bravest thing I've ever done. The guys look up and see that there are cars coming and hop on a motorcycle and drive away. My friend immediately starts having a panic attack. Some guy in his car sees us and pulls over, asking if we're fine, what wrong, etc. is. I explain the situation and he asks if he could drop us home. Honestly, maybe not our smartest idea, but we got in and he drops us off. It was literally a 2-minute drive from her house, but she lives in a somewhat secluded area. The shock of what just happened then hits me and I start to panic, crying, wondering if that was how I would have died. To this day, anytime someone approaches me on the street/calls out to me to stop, my panic goes into an intense override and I just run off.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.